Stuck half in and half out of the car, still alive, with his torso angled down into the front passenger seat. But the driver, who is a nurse named Shantae Mallard, does not stop and does not call 911, doesn't assist in any way, despite the fact that she had medical training. And what she does do next is very shocking and makes you think, is this just an accident or is it murder?
Fort Worth 911, how can I help you?
Hi, I'm Concrete Love, off-duty fireman, and at 2800 Cobb Park Drive in the park, we have a body here. White male, he is cold, got rigor, his body's contorted. He is gone.
I was in the office. I was working that weekend, and I received a deceased body found in Cobb Park on the east side of Fort Worth. A lot of older African Americans kind of hang around that area. They'll cook, they'll play games, but also a lot of people drive through Cobb Park and they use drugs there.
I'd spend hours in Cobb Park. It had a really bad reputation at that time. We got calls to Cobb Park daily. I would say at least once every shift.
So when I drive through the park, I can clearly see a body of a white male. When I examined the body, I was looking for any type of damage, like was he shot, was he stabbed, was he struck by an instrument? And you didn't see those type of injuries on his body, not to his chest, his face, you didn't see that. What you saw was the leg was very badly contorted. His left foot was laying across his stomach. It was broken so badly. The way rigor mortis was set in, his hand was twisted in an odd position. So he'd been dead for a few hours. I also noticed that it was covered in shards of glass. Next to his body, I could see some very entrenched tire marks. It looks like he may have been hit or struck by a vehicle. So he's been in the park. I'm assuming he was there at night. Someone ran him over and just left him there. It's very possible he could have been a homeless person in the park sleeping when he was struck by a car. It looks like an accident or something that our traffic investigation unit work, not us, not homicide.
Under Texas law, the typical charge for a hit and run is FSRA, which is failure to stop and render aid. In 2001, FSRA was punishable as a second-degree felony with anything from 2 years probation to 10 years in prison when a death was involved.
So at that point, I called traffic investigation and said, hey, I've got an incident here that looks like it's probably going to be a hit and run or failure to stop and render aid. So our traffic investigation unit made the scene. Anytime you have a death, the first thing you have to do is figure out who your victim is. He did have ID. The victim was Gregory Biggs.
They learned that he grew up in Duncanville, which is a small town east of Fort Worth, and married his high school sweetheart. At the time of Greg's death, he was divorced, which under Texas law makes his 17-year-old son, Brandon Biggs, his next of kin. The police also learned that Gregory, who suffers from some mental health issues, had been living at a homeless shelter at the time of his death.
My sister called. She goes, hey, he was real good friends with Greg Biggs. And I was like, yeah. She goes, well, on the news tonight, they're storing, I think he's dead. And I'm like, what? And watch the news. Yeah, and it was him. There was following news reports, I guess I remember seeing, that he had mental issues and was homeless. I didn't see any of that in high school. But I guess from what I understand, bipolar and stuff can come in later in life. And, other than just the shock at the moment, I start, questioning myself. How did I lose touch with him? How did I not work harder to find him. Met Greg Biggs back in 1979, back in high school, and we hit it right off. It was just one of those things, we'd known each other all our lives. He would make friends with everybody and anybody, anywhere, anytime. I mean, it may sound cliche or cheesy, but he would give you the shirt off his back.
When you have a case like this, the autopsy is extremely crucial in terms of looking for evidence. The medical examiner can tell by the autopsy the way the body was damaged. Gregory Biggs had broken legs, broken ankle. He has a real major laceration across his lower abdomen, and there's scratches on the body. And extremely important is that you see lividity on the shoulders and the front part of his body.
Lividity is a post-mortem phenomenon that occurs in the body when the blood pools after the heart stops pumping.
And so, because of the lividity, we know that he was laying in a different position when he died, and he had to have been moved from that location to another position at the park.
With evidence of Greg's body being moved, this is no longer a traffic accident. This has become a murder investigation.
In Dallas today, family members gathered to remember 37-year-old Gregory Biggs.
Within a few days after Gregory Biggs is found dead in the park, his son has the very, very sad task of arranging for his father's funeral, and it was just attended by his son and a few others.
I think it's good, really, to make my dad known more as not just a homeless man, because he wasn't always that way.
Greg was a solid, loyal friend. Sweet and simple. Nothing complicated. You knew where you stood with him.
So we pretty much know what we're looking for based on the injuries to the victim. There's going to be significant damage to the vehicle. So now you're looking at who fixes cars, anyone who's towed a vehicle, anyone that's seen a vehicle that has damage. So we put that out to the media, offer a reward. But 3 or 4 months into the investigation, we were just stuck with no suspects, and we had no real direction. And then we received a tip.
Terry County Sheriff's Department, may I help you?
Not that long ago, there was an article in the paper about a man with a head down in Kyle Park. There was a hit and run. And my best friend's homegirl is the one that did it.
What was unique about the case when we got it is that typically we get a case and the police have finished their investigation and they just give us a final product. We got involved on the ground floor on this one, so we were actively involved in the initial investigation. I can't think of another case that I've ever dealt with that has had this level of just absurdity. This woman who called into the police, she'd been at a party and heard this woman she identified as Shantae Mallard tell the story about being at the club months earlier. She was drinking some at the bar. She had half of an ecstasy pill. And when she drove home, she hit some white guy with her car.
And then she drove her car with him still on the car. And she drove her car home and parked it in the garage. And the man was dying, but he was still alive.
It sounded crazy. We were getting information that 4 months later, the car could still be in Shantae Mallard's garage. Technically, if you receive information like what we received in the 911 call, you could issue an arrest warrant for Shantae Mallard. But Richard is a prosecutor's prosecutor and incredibly thorough. And so we decide, let's write a search warrant. Let's see, is this car in fact still there?
Police department goes to Shantae Mallard's house with a search warrant. And there they get way more than they bargained for.
She said, I didn't mean to hit him. I was shocked.
Blood is still in the visor. Hair is still in the headliner of the car. She, in essence, hid him from anyone else who could render medical attention.
What did you see?
The backside of a body lodged out of the window.
It was the darkest night of Greg Bigg's life.
The dispatchers put out a request for assistance for the detectives to run a search warrant on a female, Shantae Muller. And Shantae answered the door. Normally, when somebody shows up at your house with a search warrant, they want to know why you're searching, why you're there. She obviously knew it was coming because she didn't say anything. We directed her to the living room, and then they began their search. Immediately, I saw the vehicle in the garage. What was left of it. Huge hole in the windshield and what looked like dried blood where his body had hit the windshield.
Here we are 4 months later, and the car's still there, and hair and blood is still in the headliner. There were still ties to the crime in her possession.
Shantae had her head down and out of nowhere said, "I didn't mean to hit him." I was shocked.
So on her own, not in response to any police officer questioning, Shantae Mallard comes out with this admission that she is the person who hit Greg Biggs.
I wasn't expecting that. We handcuffed her and we took her to the station.
Once Shantae Mallard starts being interviewed down at the station, she comes out with this version of what happened that night, and it is a story unlike anything I've ever heard before.
Shantae Mallard tells them that she had gone to a club that night.
She says that she'd only had 2 drinks and no drugs.
She also tells police she believes that someone slipped something into her drink.
Because when the club closed that night, she was feeling really loose and a little wobbly.
And that on the way home, on the freeway, she had struck a man.
Shantae described it, he was in my car and just stuck in the right passenger windshield.
She panicked and she did not know what to do, and that she drove home with him still impaled into the windshield. And she pulls into the garage and puts the door down. She tells police that she was apologizing to him profusely in the garage, and at one point he responded, like groaned or something in some way. So her statement indicates that he was alive at the time.
Shantae told the police that after all that, she went into her house and just sat on the kitchen floor and cried, claimed that she did not know how long the man lived for.
And then Shantae tells police that she called an on-again, off-again love interest named Vaughn, and that he got rid of the body. She said that he took care of it.
She really deflects all blame on this unknown person named Vaughn that takes care of the body, and she has no idea what happens to the body.
I think we expected that this is going to be someone who was intoxicated, hit somebody on a freeway, and just failed to stop. But it evolved in such a way that it was unthinkable and unspeakable.
Police draft an arrest warrant, and she's arrested. The next morning, Richard and I went to look at the vehicle in the Fort Worth Police Pound. And inside of the door well, there is a fingerprint in blood. And when we test that blood, it comes back to be Greg Biggs, which shows he was alive and able to exert enough force or enough pressure to make a fingerprint. Our theory was that he was pulling himself out of the windshield. He's struggling to live. And every breath he took had to be so painful.
We took the time to travel that road that she traveled down. We literally counted all the places that could provide emergency care, all the phone booths that were there.
Also, we came to find out that Shantae worked in a number of different medical facilities as a certified nurse's assistant.
Shantae Mallard knows how to take steps to get him help, and they chose not to do so.
When she drove him home into her garage and closed the door, she in essence hid him from anyone else who could render medical attention, who could save his life.
If she had hit him and then immediately stopped and tried to help him, she probably would have been looking at a charge of intoxication manslaughter. And because she was a first offender, she probably would have seriously been looking at probation.
She's originally arrested for failing to stop and render aid, and we knew that at a minimum she had done that. But in Texas, we have what's called felony murder. And that is if you commit one felony and you just simply do another act that results in someone's death, that is also murder here in Texas.
The risk of raising the charge to felony murder on this case is we go all in on the higher charge, and by seeking more than we had to begin with, we might end up with nothing. So Shantae, in her statement she gave to the police, is mentioning somebody named Vaughn, someone who was actually involved in the crime of disposing of the body. But we could not find a Vaughn, or could not find anyone that even knew a Vaughn. Even people that purport to be her friends don't have any idea who this person is.
The fact that they can't find any more information about him, it's suspicious. I mean, is Vaughn even a real person?
In Texas, all felonies, as a general rule, are presented to a grand jury. And so I used the grand jury as an investigative body. We brought in multiple possible witnesses.
One of those people was her best friend, Kelly Siegler.
We bring her friend T in front of the grand jury in the hopes of finding out what happened in the missing hours between Shantae hitting Greg Biggs and Greg Biggs' body being found in Cobb Park. So T testifies in front of the grand jury that Shantae shows up at her house the next morning after hitting Greg Biggs. And there's no description of seeing Shantae the night before. We believe she knows more than what she's saying. And we subpoena her cell phone records. And we find all these different phone calls that tell a very different story. We know she was talking to Shantae Mallard that night. And it's just a matter of finding where she's vulnerable, what will finally make her tell us the truth. We bring T in front of the grand jury in the hopes of finding out what happened in the missing hours before Greg Biggs' body being found in Cobb Park.
I told T, if you don't tell me the truth, you could be subject to being charged with perjury, and that's a felony in the state of Texas. And I think at a certain point, T realizes that if I continue down this road, all I'm going to get out of it is an indictment. Or I can turn around and cooperate, and the DA's office has told me they'll give me immunity. And at the end of the day, T gave us the real story of what happened.
T describes how Shantae gets off of work and she comes over to T's apartment, and then they get dressed and they go to Joe's Big Bamboo. T said they had 2 or 3 drinks and they closed the bar down. Shantae decides she's fine to drive and she goes home. And after Shantae is back at home around 3 a.m. in the morning, and Shantae calls her, she whispers, "Come pick me up." T comes over to Shantae's house, and our best estimate is that it's around 3:30 a.m. in the morning. And so still pretty shortly after hitting Greg Biggs. I mean, for all we know, Greg Biggs could still have been alive in the garage.
And when T came to pick up Shantae, Shantae ran outside, didn't let her in the house. He just got in the car and said, "Drive." And so they went off and drove, and she was talking to her about what had happened. And it wasn't 2 hours later that she brought her back to the house. And by the time T is back at the house, Gregory Biggs had died. I fully believe that Shantae made a very concerted effort to not give T an opportunity to know exactly what had happened. She did not want to give her a chance to see that Gregory Biggs could still be alive.
And T says, "I tell Shantae, call 911. And Shantae refuses to do that.
At the time of the indictment, what we lacked was the complete story about disposing of the body. We still have to nail down the individuals that helped Shantae. So Shantae, in her statement she gave to the police, is mentioning somebody named Vaughn, but we could not find a Vaughn or could not find anyone that even knew a Vaughn.
We eventually find Vaughn when a woman contacts the police department and gives them an anonymous tip. Vaughn is a person named Clee Jackson. The DA investigators go and interview Clee Jackson. He tells investigators that he helped Shantae with moving Greg Biggs' body, and he says he got help from his cousin, Herbert Tyrone Cleveland.
Both these people have criminal histories, and that gives us leverage because they're both facing not just a little bit of time, but a lot of time. They came in with attorneys. We laid out, you can tell us the truth, testify in our trial, and you will get a lower range of punishment.
They struck deals with prosecution. They were charged with tampering with physical evidence. They'd received 9 and 10 years in prison in exchange for their testimony.
Unlike T, Clee Jackson and Tyrone Cleveland actually helped dispose of Greg Biggs' body. And if the prosecutors are seen as letting them off too easy, this can weaken their case against Shantae Mallard in the eyes of the jury.
We knew the reputation of Shantae Mallard's attorneys. That was going to be the first card that was going to be played, is these people got a sweet deal to make up lies about our client. It was important to us, the jury, look at the deal and say, 10 years in prison does not seem like a sweet deal.
I remember when all of this started. Richard and Christy Jack, they were the stars of the Tarrant County DA's office, so we all knew each other. And then this crazy case happened with this crazy scenario. Publicity got bigger and bigger, and probably was Christy and Richard's once-in-a-lifetime case. And we all know that that's the kind of case that can make your career or break your career. As the trial approaches, the media attention got bigger and bigger, and at some point the judge decided to allow cameras in the courtroom. So the pressure that also brought on all the lawyers involved had to have been huge.
It wasn't a local story. It wasn't a regional story. It wasn't a state story. It was a national and international story. It exploded because it was such a crazy story.
The courtroom was packed. I remembered almost tripping over one of the news truck's cords as I was walking in that morning.
On day one of the trial, when Shantae Mallard pled not guilty to felony murder, but guilty to FSRA, which is failure to stop and render aid. It would seem like to a jury, she's taking full responsibility for the one crime, FSRA, while maintaining her innocence to guilt, and I thought that was a pretty good strategic decision on the part of her lawyers.
I want to tell you about a set of facts, about a crime, almost the perfect crime. I truly believe that juries form opinions at the very beginning of trials. And I want the jury to understand all of the decisions that she made before she ever got home, all the places that she passes, all the places where she could stop and she doesn't, and she goes home. And when she gets home, she does call for help, but the help isn't for Greg Biggs. The help is for her. And T says, when Shantae calls her, she whispers, "Come pick me up." She whispered because she didn't want Greg Biggs to hear her. That just tells me. Greg Biggs was still very much alive in her garage.
Within an hour and a half to 2 hours of this accident, Gregory Biggs was dead. And the state tells you that that amounts to murder. I'm telling you that's not murder.
Jeff and Reagan's defense is, this is an overreach. This isn't murder. This is only failing to stop and render aid. This is a young lady who simply panicked. She got scared. She was under the influence of something that she'd never taken before in her life. She didn't know what to do.
The main thing we're trying to demonstrate is that the injuries that were sustained were not going to be fatal. that they could have been treated.
He does not have injury patterns that are consistent with instantaneous death. The other injuries will lead to death if not medically attended, but will take time to occur.
He very firmly believed the cause of death was directly related to leaving Gregory Biggs in her garage.
Richard and I, and Miles Brissett, he was the third prosecutor on the case, are very visual when we present cases to the jury. This was incredibly important in this case, and it was Miles's idea to bring the car into the courtroom.
They told me that they had this way they figured out to bring the vehicle into the courtroom. It was brilliant. It was absolutely wonderful. It has to be taken apart to fit into the courtroom. So they have to bring it in and put it together so that we can show the jury that fits with our story.
I'm familiar with bringing physical evidence into the courtroom, and Richard and Christy and I were all taught from the very beginning to try and do whatever you can to make the crime come alive to the jury. So the more you can do that with the actual evidence, the more you can make a jury appreciate what it's like to have been there. That had to be hugely helpful.
I think showing how close the driver's seat was to the passenger seat really brought home in a very palpable way how close she was to this man that she just let die.
So the physical evidence is presented to the jury. It's very compelling. But next up, her friends are going to take the stand.
We know it's a risk to bring her friends to the stand.
We're all wondering, what are they going to say? Is their testimony going to paint her to be a compassionate person? Or they're going to put the nail in the coffin?
What do your friends call you?
T.
On October 25th, 2001, did you have some plans to go out with Shantae?
Yes, I did.
T describes how Shantae gets off of work and she comes over to T's apartment, and it's probably 10:30 by then.
We have a drink.
What else did you do?
We split an X pill.
What, ecstasy?
Yes. And we smoked a joint.
And they go to Joe's Big Bamboo.
What kind of place is that?
It's an adult nightclub.
And they close the bar down. Then they leave, and T testifies that Shantae is too intoxicated to drive.
So who drove?
I did.
And what happened when you got to your place?
I offered to follow Shantae home, and she said she didn't need me to.
And then she gives us the phone call after Shantae has hit Greg Biggs, when she gives the words, "Come pick me up."
Like, as if a whisper.
Like she didn't want someone to hear her?
Yes.
When she called T to come to her house that night, Shantae did a good job of keeping T away from the body as long as possible, but she does at some point get a chance to go in the garage and see the body.
I saw the backside of a body lodged out of the window.
When she's talking about it, to my eyes, it's still visibly affecting her because it's shocking. It's shocking to see a body like that.
And did she call 911?
No.
During the trial, I make a habit of looking at the defendant. I like to see the reaction. I noticed there were less tears when T was testifying and more anger at the times I did glance over there. She was angry. She'd been betrayed. So then T goes home, and Shantae called Cleet to help get rid of the evidence, to transport the body to Cobb Park.
With bloodshot eyes, Shantae Mallard listened to hours of testimony, the last of which came from her former boyfriend.
Cleet was challenging because Cleet did not like me.
You could tell there was a body in the car. Were you upset?
Yeah. I just got out of prison. I just got my life right to be a father to my kids.
She thought she just got you in trouble.
I knew she got me in trouble.
So you have him on the blanket, and what do you do with the blanket?
Tied up.
And then what'd you do?
Kind of like apologize, sort of, to him.
Here you have this hardened criminal, and you see the single little tear where he says he apologized to Greg Biggs. Cleet Jackson, to me, was a very compelling witness. You knew he didn't want to be there. You knew that what he was saying was the truth and that it pained him. I think Shantae was trying to divest herself of all of the decisions after hitting Greg Biggs. But Shantae was the one that decided they needed to get rid of the body. In fact, there was discussion about burning Greg Biggs' body and the car. And Cleet Jackson was the one who had the decency to say no.
We just finna put him somewhere where his family can find him so they can bury him because it was an accident.
Her friends didn't want to be there. They didn't want to testify. They weren't on the prosecutor's side, but they still told the truth. That's just so beautifully credible. It was a great help to the case.
Did you decide to call somebody?
Tyrone, my cousin.
And what happened when you got to the park?
We took him out the car, Tyrone and I.
How'd you get the blanket open?
Cut it off.
And who gave you the knife to cut it off with?
Shantae gave it to Tyrone and he handed it to me.
Cleet helped our narrative by just demonstrating that Shantae was actively involved in the disposal of the body.
And this is very harmful to the defense because it establishes one more time how much Shantae was trying to hide what she did in a very cold-blooded manner.
In her first interview with police, Shantae Mallard talks about how other people are responsible for moving Greg Biggs' body. But Cleet Jackson then comes in and explains, no, she was right there with us. She was part and parcel dumping the body in Cobb Park.
Shantae talks about driving into her garage and shutting the door. This is way after that. So putting these friends on the stand and dragging out of them that she's still orchestrating this, she's still trying to make sure she doesn't get caught, is a huge part of the case.
Since Cleet and I did not get along, I was concerned that Cleet was going to say things that I'd never heard before when he's being cross-examined. I was worried he could turn on us at any minute.
When Shantae arrived at Joe's Big Bamboo Club, and when you first saw her there, you immediately noticed that she looked different.
Yes, sir.
And by different, you mean that she looked like she was under the influence of something that you had never seen her be under the influence of. Is that right?
Right.
The defense strategy was to focus on the level of intoxication, and I expected them to do that.
The defense is wanting to play up the fact that Shantae was messed up on alcohol and ecstasy. The risk is that one juror might think she probably wouldn't have acted that way if she wouldn't have been high or drunk or messed up that night. So I'm going to cut her a little slack because of it.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear.
After the testimony about what all happened to Greg Biggs is complete, the prosecutors call his son, Brandon Biggs, to the stand to talk about what kind of a man his dad was.
How old are you?
20 years old.
Are you in school?
Yes.
And what kind of degree are you seeking?
Church ministries degree.
What kind of work did your father do?
He was self-employed as a bricklayer.
What kind of person was your father?
I'd say he was very hardworking. Although he didn't have many friends, he was very friendly.
As a prosecutor, I'm not effective very much, but I will never forget listening to Brandon talk about how his father was a very friendly person, but he didn't have very many friends. And it was just so sad, and there were tears in the gallery.
Did your father have any kind of illness?
He was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and mild schizophrenia.
Can you tell me what the circumstances of him losing his home and his vehicle were?
He had found a girlfriend. She had wrecked our car, and he had asked me one day if he should help her. I told him yes, I thought he should. And when he helped her financially, loaning her money, he was unable to make his truck payment, and that's how it was taken from him.
So without his truck, how was he able to continue working in his business?
He was not.
And ultimately, did he lose his home?
He did.
Gregory Biggs is a person that loses their livelihood, their car, their home, because they did an unselfish act. They helped someone. It painted this diametrically opposite picture of Gregory Biggs from Shantae Mallard. It gave us a crucial piece that we needed for argument, which is that Here is the way a life is supposed to be lived. If you want to know what a person with character looks like, look at the person that's the subject of this autopsy report. Meeting Brandon, finding out about him and his life, that he had a connection with his father, did something that was absolutely crucial, that without him we wouldn't have had. It humanized him.
I always write notes of what the defense says in their opening statement so that I can turn around and use it in closing argument. Jeff Kearney talks about it being the darkest night of all. How can this be the darkest night for her? She's alive.
It was dark, and his body was racked with pain. Gripping the door pocket, he tried to right himself, and he struggled to find the words.
And when Shantae Mallard closed the garage door, closed the door from the kitchen into the garage, and turned the lights off, it was the darkest night of Greg Biggs' life.
I get the initial accident. You're scared. You're drunk, you're stoned, whatever. I get that. But hours later, when you sober up, or you're coming down or whatever, and you still do nothing, and you are a healthcare professional, you intentionally waited till the person was dead. You murdered them. That's just evil.
There's no question in this case that Shantae's failure to render aid or call for assistance probably caused his death. That's not murder.
Being first chair in my closing argument, my main focus is responding to what Jeff had to say. It's the closing argument, and his focus on the law, his focus on how this doesn't fit. From a legal standpoint, lots of people in the legal field struggle with felony murder. My experience is that lay people do not. There's a dead body. They're dead because of you. That's murder. So the jury comes back in an hour, and I would lie if I said that I wasn't nervous.
State ready?
State's ready, Your Honor.
Defense ready?
We're ready, Your Honor.
Bring in the jury. Let's bring in the jury.
The jury comes back in an hour. I've learned over time, you really can't predict anything from jury deliberations.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Shantae Juan Mallard, guilty of the offense of murder as charged in count 1 of the indictment.
Jurors unanimously agreed with the prosecution. Now they must decide what price Shantae Mallard will pay for leaving Gregory Biggs to die in her car windshield.
The range of punishment for what she's convicted of for felony murder is 5 to 99 years or life.
After the defense put on a very impressive array of witnesses from Shantae's world, the defense calls Shantae Mallard herself to the stand. Typically in a criminal case, if you're going to put a defendant on the stand, you do it in the guilt phase to try to argue they're not connected to what happened. The defense didn't do that in guilt, and they wanted to put her on the stand in punishment because at that point, they needed a jury to see what a great person she is, that she's a first offender, that she's sorry, therefore she would get the lower range of punishment, possibly even probation.
I have ruined my family's life. I have put people through pain. And I am so truly sorry. I am so sorry, Brandon.
She was sympathetic to a point, but the decisions that she made shows that she was only thinking about her own self and how to get out of the situation. It was a selfishness that spanned 4 months. And even then when she was arrested, lying to the police.
She had taken the ecstasy willingly. No one had slipped anything in her drink. And when she talked about someone taking care of the body, she was actually instrumental in that.
Now the prosecutors had their chance to cross-examine Shantae Mallard.
When you realized you hit somebody, you didn't think, well, I've got to get some help, did you?
I didn't know what to do.
What I'm trying to do is demonstrate this is a person that is selfish. This is a person that lacks a moral compass, that has no excuse for her behavior.
I wasn't capable of making decisions.
You weren't capable of making decisions? You made a decision to get in the car and drive, right?
Yes.
You made a decision to take the ecstasy.
Yes.
You made a decision, the decisions involved in driving that got you to the point where you hit Gregory Biggs.
Yes.
And after hitting him, your ability to decide was gone?
After I was on the ecstasy and I just started making a lot of bad decisions and I was scared. I didn't know what to do.
So it was the ecstasy's fault?
And I mean, it was a master class on cross-examination. There was no place she could turn. We asked the jury to hand down a life sentence, and the jury gave her what amounted to almost a life sentence. She was sentenced to 50 years for murder.
There are no winners in a case like this. Just as we all lost Greg, you all will be losing your daughter.
One of the most impactful things that I saw in this case was when Greg Biggs' son, Brandon, took the stand.
To Shante, I personally would like to say that I would accept your apology. But in return, I hope that you would accept my forgiveness.
Brandon's forgiveness, Brandon's compassion, Brandon's faith never wavered from the first meeting to the last statement before the jury. Every case you deal with the prosecutor is kind of a barometer to help you measure and how you weigh conduct, because you have a tremendous amount of power. This case stands alone.
Brandon Biggs is the embodiment of forgiveness and compassion. And yet, on the stand, one of the things that he said was, I forgive you, but consequences are still owed. We all make mistakes. But if you make a mistake and you realize you make a mistake, it's not too late to do the right thing.